order your books online at bookshop.org. That's an Amazon alternative that supports independent bookstores. All your purchases through the Badass Book List will go directly to Bard's Alley. A link to the book list was in today's lineup and will be in the summit recap. You can always go to networknova.org/badassbooklist. And finally, I want to thank all the supporters who stood by us when we couldn't do an in-person event and cheered us on when we decided to switch to a virtual one. Thank you. We wouldn't be here tonight without you. And now I'm going to turn it over to the one and only Catherine White.
Well, thank you. So good to see you all in the room tonight. The Zoom where it really happens, as I like to say. And look at me, I'm still in the room from last year where we took back power. So it's so exciting to be with you all. My name is Catherine White. I'm the program director for Network Nova. And since this kickoff last Saturday, we've been going strong, meeting our goals to energize and get us focused on what? Winning, because winning is
the only option.
The only option. Thank you. I hope people out there were saying that. So we started this afternoon with the power lunch discussion on racism and other isms. It was beyond informative. So if you missed it, it's in the YouTube channel. They got real on racism, and there was also actionable takeaways, which we like as activists, right? And it's going to be in the link, and you also get the summit recap on both sessions later today or tomorrow. So welcome to day 5 of the Women's Summit Experience, brought to you by the letter R. And that's for race and rural issues. Today's session is moderated by Lindsey Davis Stover. Welcome, Lindsey. And I'm going to say something. First of all, your bio is so incredible that I am going to put the link in the chat, but please allow me to highlight a few of the points about you. I met you when you ran for office in 2018, and you were an incredible candidate. And so when I read your record, I'm like, holy cowsy. You graduated from Baylor University with a Bachelor of Arts in Communications and Political Science, and you have a master's degree in public policy, receiving the Stormy Schock Award for Academics. You also hold a master's degree in public administration from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, and you received the Donald Price Award for Academics and Leadership. You're also appointed to the Senior Executive Service in the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, which I know is really close to your heart. And you also served at the VA's White House Liaison and co-chaired the VA Strategic Communications Council. I'm not done, one more couple things. Lindsey served as Chief of Staff to the U.S. Congressman Chet Edward, and you now currently are part of Edwards, Davis, Stover, and Associates, a strategic consulting firm. Whew. All right. Woo, my goodness. So anyway, happy that you're here tonight, Lindsey, and I'm going to hand the mic over to you and your wonderful panel tonight. Thank you all.
Well, thank you so much, Network Nova, for bringing us all together. Thank you for all of the participants tonight who are sharing your evening with us. And a big thank you to the panelists. I am honored to be sharing a screen with all of you this evening. And I want to quickly introduce everybody, because I know we want the bulk of our session tonight to be about raising rural voices. But I am so excited to have joining us this evening 2 former candidates, Jennifer Woofter and Christian Worth. We also have 2 campaign workers, rural activists, Ian McNally and Lynlee Thorne. And then we have Delegate Chris Hurst and Delegate Wendy Gooditis. And we have head of the Rural Caucus, Vee Fry. And we have Sister Simone Campbell from Network Lobby. So thank you all so much for joining us. The amount of knowledge and experience on one screen tonight, I know is going to be so impactful as we work diligently to continue to raise rural voices. And I want to kick off our session tonight with a video that Jennifer Woofter made for us. And it really highlights the experience of running in rural areas. So Robin, will you kick off the video for us?
When I ran for the House of Delegates last year, it was the first time in 6 years, and only the second time in 19 years, that a Democrat had challenged our long-term Republican incumbent. I knew from the beginning that the odds were slim that I could win, but I also knew that voters deserved a choice at the ballot box, and that it was important to stand up and fight for issues that matter. We had been ignored for too long and taken for granted. The campaign was brutal, and let me tell you, the hard part wasn't fighting the Republicans. It was fighting my fellow Democrats. From a local leader who told me, don't waste your time, it's not winnable, to the House Caucus and DPVA, who dumped millions of dollars into other races, but declined to invest even a couple $100s in our campaign to help get out the vote. The greatest challenge in my campaign and other rural campaigns was apathy, in a sense that we were a lost cause and not worth fighting for. You guys, in 2020, we have to change that narrative. If we want to win, to really win, we need to be investing in races all over the Commonwealth with dedicated funding to rural campaigns and committees. We need to acknowledge that a win might not come in year 1 or even year 5, but without investing, we're never going to move the needle. It also means making sure that rural voices have a seat at the table before legislation is introduced that reinforces a belief that Democrats are out to take your guns or care more about pipelines than they do about farmers. It means educating ourselves and our friends about rural issues and actively checking the impulse by some in our circle to think about rural Virginians as second-class citizens. The question, what did winning mean in 2019? I will tell you, for rural candidates, the experience left a bitter taste in our mouths and a real question. Are Democrats fighting for everyone in Virginia? Are we willing to fight even when we can't win this time around? And will we ever win if we don't put up a real fight?
Jennifer, thank you so much for that video and for capturing so many of the challenges that I know we're going to talk about tonight. And I want to kick it off with just this question. And Lynlee, I'd love for you to address this of why it's important to support rural Democrats. You are on the ground time and time again, and you know how tough it is. So can you tell us and kick off the discussion tonight by talking about why it's so important?
Yes, thank you, Lindsay. And on behalf of everyone that worked with Rural Ground Game, we want to extend our thanks to the Women's Summit for offering this opportunity to hear a perspective about what it takes to stand up in rural Virginia. We're in a really inspiring and pivotal and sometimes scary moment in our country right now. And I think it's one where we're being reminded that far too often we've left a lot of people behind. Every race, every ethnicity, every socioeconomic background, all gender identities, all deserve representation. And as Democrats and progressives, we've consistently left a lot of people behind. I think everyone on this call who's participating here wants to work towards justice, even when that is uncomfortable. I'm sure we all want to work towards that as opposed to being cozy and stuck where we've been. But if we're truly committed to the values that we share, we have to show up and fight for those in every single zip code. And that is the work that we've tried to do. And thank you again for this opportunity and for allowing us to speak to that.
Well, thank you, Lynlee, and thank you for the fight that you show time and time again on the ground. Christian, I'd love for you to talk about what are the challenges like running and organizing in rural communities across Virginia?
Yes, that's a great question, Lindsay. The sheer size of our districts is the most major challenge. Voters are more spaced out, miles apart even, and we have fewer resources with which to reach them. So it's also harder for us to raise money and get support outside of our districts because our races don't always end in victories. The 10 of us who ran in rural House and Senate races and formed Rural Ground Game in 2019 did so because we could not afford to be included in the coordinated campaigns. So by collaborating and pooling our resources, we were able to run an independent, data-driven, coordinated, and to do what we did in an intentional, data-informed way. So to put that in perspective with some numbers, of the 92 Democrats that ran for the House of Delegates in Virginia in 2019, 33 received direct financial support from the House Caucus. 40% of those that received funds won by over 20%. The 8 of us in Rural Ground Game who ran for the House, if you were to take our campaign budgets and combine them, that amount would account for just 38% of the budget of the highest funded party targeted House of Delegates race. So to some, the cost per vote of those 33 House caucus funded races came to $44.10. The cost per vote of our 8 rural ground game House races was $8.37 per vote. So what we know is that our dollars mean more out here, which is why we banded together to do more with the dollars that we had. And so we are grateful for those elected Democrats who noticed our efforts, and we have Delegate Chris Hurst with us this evening, who supported us with his Holler project. And we had other elected Democrats who showed up and helped us make better efforts at fundraising and made a difference. So while we're realistic about the challenges of running and organizing in rural areas, and we know that those victories won't come right away, we are all in it to win it. And we hope that through this panel tonight, we could come together and work together and have the support of not just each other, but of the party and all of you. And with that, we know we can get there. Thank you.
Christian, just data points that you gave are so telling, because when you're in campaigns, you often hear money and message, right? And so, Ian, I'd love for you to speak to kind of the messaging piece of that, right? And how Democrats can better frame their messages to be even more effective in rural areas.
Definitely, thanks for that. And I think something that we're guilty of sometimes as progressives is that we hear only our side of the story. And then when we're encountering a very red, very sometimes misinformed view, I think a really easy example here is gun legislation. We hear immediately that every sort of Democratic proposal is instantly gun grabby, and we're out to take your guns, we're out to disarm and do all of that sort of nonsense. But in essence, if we don't show up in rural localities, if we don't have a Democrat running saying, no, that's not what I'm about, then we let that narrative win. And in Virginia, I think we were really guilty of in this last cycle, we had some gun bills that made it to the floor and to the table that the language of them was a little problematic. And the way that we can really try to avoid that situation is to make sure that we have Democrats and progressives and our entire coalition present at the table when we make those decisions. A lot of you that have been in rural areas, have been paying attention to rural politics, you likely encountered or witnessed or simply have heard of the Second Amendment sanctuary protest movement that happened. In a lot of these House of Delegates races, the vote margin was a couple thousand votes, if that, when there are tiny, tiny counties like Franklin County, Appomattox County, and they have thousands of people that are armed showing up because they believe that Democrats are now coming to take their guns. We see a massive fallout there, both socially and politically. In the city of Lynchburg, there's a really easy example there where multiple militias surrounded and really engaged in the counties around the city of Lynchburg. And they've actually been armed walking into the city, into a progressively held city, and actually trying to replace law enforcement in some situations. So we want to not say that the rural perspective is more important than the urban perspective or vice versa. We want to just say, let's have everybody have a voice at the table. We recognize that there are Virginians, there are Americans that have different perspectives simply because they've lived in a different zip code. And let's have them at the table too when we make these decisions and write this legislation.
Absolutely. And you make such a great point when you're talking about messaging. I mean, that ultimately leads to branding, right, of Democrats in rural areas, and not just in Virginia, but nationwide, right? Making sure that Democrats in particular can be competitive in every single zip code. Jennifer, can you talk a little bit about what we can be doing to make sure that we build strong brands as Democrats in rural areas?
Yeah, I would love to speak to that. I will say running in a rural area can feel very lonely. On election day, it can feel lonely when you realize you are the only Democrat on the ballot across multiple municipalities, multiple ballots. When there are Republicans coming out to fight for their favorite of 3 or 4 Republican sheriffs on the ballot, I would say we underperformed 6 to 8% from where we thought we could be because of that enthusiasm gap, because there were so many Republicans you could come out and vote for, and it was just me, the one Democrat, pulling our side out. It can feel very lonely. So I think the first thing is we need to do a better job of making sure we are running Democrats every seat, every cycle, from governor down to dog catcher, whether it's commissioner of the revenue, clerk of the court, like all of these ones that we sort of given up on. I think, so that's a first thing, is building the bench from the ground up. The second part is really supporting our committees. That it was interesting to sort of run and see my fellows from maybe Northern Virginia or Henrico or Urban Crescent committees showing up and doing their big phone banking and their big canvassing and their lots of activity, and then to compare that to our committees, who tend to be a little bit smaller, tend to have less infrastructure, definitely have less funding. So it's not just that our campaigns had smaller staff, it was that we had a smaller pool of infrastructure to rely on as we put our campaigns together. So helping our committees, partnering with rural committees, amplifying rural issues, all of those things are at the committee level, I think, can really help. The third thing is, I think we need to really make sure that our statewide democratic institutions support rural candidates. Christian speaks to the fact that only 1/3 of the House of Delegates races this year were supported with direct cash contributions by the state Democratic Party. The training, sometimes we would go to trainings and it would be exercises like, all right, everybody, let's do a thought exercise. You have $300,000 to spend in the last 10 days before the election. How are you going to do it? And we would sort of sit there and look at each other and think, that is 3 times my entire campaign budget, or 10 times my entire campaign budget. I think sometimes that the training and the support and the in-kind efforts sometimes miss the mark. The fourth thing I think that we can do to build that stronger Democratic brand is to really support the people who are down here already doing the work. There's so many, and we don't have time to name them all, but the one I really want to call out is Sam Razul, our House rep down in the Roanoke area. His work, he is such a champion for rural issues, and his group, the Impact Center, really came through for a lot of the rural candidates, whether it was help writing a press release or getting a fundraising list together or designing a postcard. They were able to come in and fill that gap in so many places where our campaigns just did not have the internal resources. So I think it's those types of things that we are really going to need to put our money where our mouth is as we go forward.
Absolutely. And you touched on such a critical point too of the organizing piece. And one thing I want to just ask Lynlee and Ian and Jennifer and Christian before we open it up to the broader panel here is we have so many chat questions today, and from people all over Virginia, all over the country, in fact, wanting to know what they can do to best support candidates running in rural areas. So real quickly, I'd like all of you to address, 1 or 2 best practices or ways in which our viewers today and people that will hopefully see this in the days ahead can better support rural candidates. Ian, can you kick us off with that?
Definitely. I think a really easy thing that I like to boil it down to is don't make it harder to run in a rural race. Frequently, there were some fundraising emails that were sent out in 2019 that named a district, but not the Democratic candidate running in that district. We had frequently messaging clashes with other Democrats in the party itself, and we were seeing that now in the news. But also, just individually, there are a lot of things that you as a person that you don't feel like you're a cog in the Democratic Party establishment, that you're just a volunteer, a committed activist that you want to help out. There are a lot of small ways that can make a really big difference out here. Whether you can get your Northern Virginia committee to partner with or adopt a smaller committee in rural areas and say, we have Facebook ads that are going out here. Some rural committees, they don't even have a Facebook page. So making sure that you can partner and show each other how the ropes work is really, really helpful. Additionally, something that Catherine actually did at the very beginning of this, right before the actual presentation here, she sent an email to a bunch of people, including electeds, saying, hey, this is an important informational session that we're talking about rural issues and rural candidates. I think this is something that you should listen to. A couple minutes ago, Delegate Hurst just retweeted that and said, hey, people, you should listen to this. This is something that we really want to do. We're talking about digital amplification and Facebook ads and things like that. Let's do that. Let's actually talk about issues like this and make sure that we grab the attention of other people. Additionally, something that I think is really important before I kind of pass on here, Delegate Reed was really, really a positive force for a lot of rural candidates. I think candidates in general across the Commonwealth. He's just a really good man. But additionally, sometimes delegates go to certain events and like they have to drive through a county or a couple counties depending on where they're going. And something that he's really good at is connecting with the people whose county he's driving through. Like if he's driving through your district on the way somewhere else, he's going to give you a call and see how you're doing. Like Jennifer mentioned, it can actually, and I don't want to overstate, but it can actually get lonely out here when like physically, like Jennifer and Christian's their districts actually touched each other, but you couldn't tell that. They had an hour and a half drive easily through a mountain range to actually get to each other's district. So you want to make sure that you're talking to other humans. So Delegate Reed doing that, just being a really gracious and warm individual, was a really, really powerful force for all of us.
Absolutely. Christian, can you give us your thoughts and best practices? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Yeah, one of the most striking facts that I can offer tonight is that 1 out of 8 Virginians is rural. So our ask of our party is to invest $1 out of $8 toward rural campaigns. And in turn, our ask of Democratic donors would be to pledge to give 1 out of 8 of your dollars to support rural candidates. We're grateful, for example, for Stacy Snyder, who I see is here this evening, and Together Virginia. She helped organize an incredible fundraiser for rural ground game candidates in Northern Virginia. We need more Stacy Snyders. And I guess our final ask of those of you listening, who we know are also amazing and tireless campaign volunteers year in and year out, is that you also consider dedicating 1 out of 8 of those precious hours to knock on some rural doors and to make some calls to rural voters. Thank you so much. We really appreciate a chance to speak this evening.
Great. Jennifer, can you offer some best practices?
Yeah, so the big takeaway that I have, not just for this election cycle, because right, it's not just about the election, it is about the long-term building the bench, building the momentum, is that our General Assembly needs to be hearing from rural voices, and our electeds, our friends, need to have ways to do that, and they need to make time and space for that. We need a mechanism for feeding up rural perspectives, whether that's a lunch that they host in Richmond that all the rural Democrats that didn't win their thing come in and kind of share their perspective, whether it is just having a group email that where we can kind of raise the red flag and saying, you guys, there are some problems with some of these bills. You are opening a can of worms that you do not really appreciate. You know, the language of the assault ban weapon, SB 6 was a great example of, you know, we say we're not coming to take your guns, but man, when there's a bill that makes it to the floor, you know, that makes it out there that says we will take your guns, that makes it so hard, so hard to go out there and look people in the face and say, I'm a Democrat, but that's not what I'm about, when they can point to that kind of legislation. And that's one example. There are others, whether it's about farming, whether it's about pipelines, whether it's about campaign finance reform. One thing I would be incredibly remiss not to mention is yesterday or today's announcement that the Democratic Party of Virginia is encouraging voters to vote against the redistricting reform amendment. That is going to hurt rural voters. That is going to hurt Democrats in rural areas. I'm from Lynchburg, which was gerrymandered into by the Republicans 10 years ago. There, it makes it virtually impossible to win a statewide in any of the 4 Virginia Lynchburg districts. I went out campaigning on redistricting reform. We supported that amendment, and then to turn around and once we get power, change our tune on that and say, just kidding, we think we can do it better. It makes it so hard to build trust with people because it feels like as soon as your party gets in power, they just do what they want. And that's something I think we really need to reckon with.
Absolutely. And Lynlee, please share with us too things that our viewers can help in this effort.
Yeah, as Ian mentioned, you have to have a title to help here. You just need to be a person who's invested in making choices, have a seat at the table. So as Jennifer mentioned earlier, a really important step is to support your local Democratic, maybe not your local Democratic committee, maybe a rural committee. And we've talked about partnering with rural committees. That's really critical. There's a lot of ways that you can do that. Fundraising is key. It just is. And we don't have enough funds out here. But part of that partnership could be advocating that our party be helpful and responsive to Democratic committees so that we can build infrastructure and learn better how to operate our resources like Vote Builder, do a better job in the digital organizing space, which is really taking off now, and we need more assistance with that. And I think just, again, leaning into those partnerships, showing up to knock some doors, driving out here and actually spending some time and being invested in these communities. We want to see you and interact with you, and for you to see the work that's being done, quite frankly, sometimes on the front lines of Trumpetry. And I think that work is very deserving of respect. So I hope that you will be able to participate in doing that work, and please be prepared to listen and to learn, because what works in your committee in Northern Virginia and Richmond might not be what works for us out here. So I look forward to opportunities where we can learn from each other and work together, because we're all in this together.
Absolutely. And it's so important, as you know, the session of this is entitled Raising Rural Voices. We have to raise these voices in order for us to be competitive and win in every zip code, not just in Virginia, but across the country. And so I want to open it now to the full panel. And I'd like to ask Delegate Chris Hurst. You've heard many of the challenges, and you've experienced many of the challenges yourself. Can you talk a little bit about those challenges and what we can do as Democrats to really start being competitive and winning in rural districts?
Well, it's kind of the most difficult question to answer in, I think, Democratic politics right now, when we have largely given up on an entire population of the people for many decades. Knowing that when the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act were passed, that there was a seismic shift, and that actually Appalachia, you know, my district, the 9th Congressional District, was one of the last to flip from Democratic to Republican, but that transition eventually did occur. And so now we're living with it. And so to try and reverse that is, as Jennifer said, going to have to take a generation. And that means that we need to start now, not only building the bench, but she really articulated a great point. We need to fight. When we need to take the fight to the other side, we may share, you know, common policy views on some things. It was mentioned, you know, on gun violence prevention, the SB 6 was terrible, right? I think that is really, really unfortunate. But lo and behold, the important thing is that there are going to be a lot of things that we are able to maybe want to find agreement with the other side on. And that is really important to talk about. But we also have to take the fight to the other side on things that we know are not helping rural families, that are not helping rural schools, and that are not helping people across the Commonwealth. And I also think that part of a rural message is to say, while we are still disadvantaged in X, Y, and Z areas, while we are still fighting for inequity, while we are still fighting against it, and we're fighting for making sure that everybody who is born in Virginia has access to equal outcomes, not just opportunity, but outcomes regardless of their zip code. That means leaning in and indulging and forming alliances with those who don't live close to us, but might have common experiences of feeling neglected, of not feeling heard, of feeling that the system is working against them. And so that's where I feel like in this time particularly, we should lean in and challenge people about even the most sensitive subjects like race relations. There's one of the best campaigners I have ever met is Chris Vaya, who works at the Volvo truck manufacturing plant in my district. And he is a true, you know, yellow dog Democrat in Giles County, which votes for me about 25%. It is, I think, the quintessential Republican county, although we all have these Republican counties. He takes it to them all the time on Facebook, out in public, at the football games, talking to them about their hypocrisy and about where they're bad on issues. And I feel like if we're able to identify this as a long-term plan, if we're able to run candidates everywhere across every different race and different position, and really do this new fundamental challenge of giving them the resources they need. I think now there have been a couple of cycles since Trump got elected where everybody everywhere really wants to run for office. Part of the reason why there hasn't been a lot of attention has been because there haven't been people running. Now that is different. So we must pay attention to the fact that we are running everywhere in Virginia. We must give them the support they need. We do that. And we have those candidates be willing to compromise where they really feel it's in their heart. But on the areas where we disagree, not being afraid and going and really fighting that hard slog that people who have run for office in rural areas can tell you. We shouldn't be afraid of that approach. That's the only approach that's going to be able to eventually bang down a door to have an open heart and open mind. But more than that, I really truly believe that if we want to have generational change to where we are competitive all across Virginia in every single zip code, in every single district, it means making those generational investments also in public policy that chiefly are about broadband internet and are about education. What we have to do is make sure that every single child in the Commonwealth, in our rural areas, has access to information, good information, and that in their public school setting, they're going to have every single opportunity possible to have the same outcome as people who live in the urban crescent. There is going to have to be some acknowledgement that we are never going to convince many people in our districts to ever be malleable to voting for a Democrat again. They tend to be older. They tend to not have as much education. That is not to say that we aren't going to work hard for them. I've done as much legislation for Giles as any other part of my district. But you have to understand that we need to make investments in the people that are coming onto the voting rolls, because they are going to start to be a real legion that we're going to need to count on in order to be able to flip this system that we have right now.
That's fantastic. And Delegate Gooditis, I want to talk a little bit about trust and the importance of building trust as a candidate with not only your constituents in rural areas, but your community members in rural areas. And you are magical at doing that. I've seen you do it in action, but you have such an incredible way of really connecting with people. Can you talk about the importance of that trust, especially in rural areas of Virginia?
Well, let's face it, there isn't a person with whom I don't have something in common, even in terms of policy. So I'm on the Ag Committee in Richmond because I'm the vice chair of the Ag Committee in Richmond, because I want to be there, because I've grown up and I've lived in the country all my life. So for those really rural people who have also lived in the country all their lives, I can talk to them about farming practices. I can talk to them about planting winter wheat versus, letting the field go fallow and planting soy in the spring. I can talk about that. I can talk about the weight of the steer, and I can talk about the output of a Holstein cow versus a Guernsey. So, I'm there. I can talk to them about that. I go to the churches and I meet people at the churches, and even in the most rural counties, I believe, especially in this day and age, in what we're going through right now, most places have an African-American church or 2 or 4 or 8. And I go to those churches and I meet the people, and some of those people who had never registered to vote will offset the votes of the ones that Delegate Hurst was talking about, who will never vote for me. So as much as they like me, and they'll tell me they like me, and they tell me to stop by any time, and they smile at me and they say, I'll never vote for you, honey. So, I still want that, and I smile and laugh at that person, and I say, you know what? I still want you to have health care. So I think one of the things I want to say is when I talk to people about a really tough issue like guns, the first thing I say is, I consider myself a proponent of the Second Amendment. You have a right to have a gun, and you have a right to defend your household. You have a right to sport, and you have a right to hunt, as long as you do it within the law. But that doesn't mean I think you should have a grenade launcher. And I start the conversation out that way. And and they, you know, when I say, I know they tell you Democrats want to take your guns away, but I say, is there a reason you should not have a background check? No. Is there a reason you should have more than 5 handguns a month? And I go down the list, and people, except for the most hardcore who are pretending that those are reasons, you know, most of them will say no. And sometimes we get to the end of that conversation and people go, and they at least understand that I'm not going to knock on their door at 3 in the morning and take their guns. So I really do talk policy. I talk about the expansion of Medicaid. I talk about the actual numbers of people in your town, in your county, who now can get their diabetes, their insulin, you know, whatever it is. And so I try to bring policy home to them. Talking about education, broadband is huge. And when I talk about broadband to people, I don't just say, we have to get broadband out here. I say, and we have to figure out a way for everyone to be able to pay for it once it's out here, to help those people who can't afford the bill that I pay for broadband out here. So, you know, everyone else has done such a wonderful job about talking about how to campaign out here and what the needs are in terms of fundraising and support and boots on the ground, and that's all very true. But to candidates and everyone reaching out, don't be afraid to, and you don't have to know everything about every piece of policy. Just know a few really key things about the biggies that you can tell people. Give them numbers, and I think it really helps. I want to end with a story about knocking on doors in rural districts. We try to get to every single door. And I have the Blue Ridge running right through the middle of my district, Shenandoah River. And, you know, we are up there in the mountain glens where people have lived in that same little wood frame house for, you know, 150 years, same family. And we drive up the driveway and we knock on the doors, we shoo the chickens out of the way off the front porch, and, you know, then there'll be, well, anyway, the stickers, the intimidating bumper stickers on the car. We do it anyway. We do it with a smile. We don't send timid volunteers up there, but I do it. My main organizers do it. But there was one Sunday night, and it was dark, let's face it, it was dark. And my finance director was driving me from rural driveway to rural driveway. And she would not even drive up this long driveway. It was really long. Couldn't see the house. It was overarching, dark, black pine trees. It was a pitch black driveway, no lights. She wouldn't even drive up the driveway. I said, let me out, I'm walking. I walked up the driveway. It's like a quarter mile long. I'm halfway there, and I hear footsteps crunching on the gravel coming up to me. And I'm like, someone's coming, and I can just barely see a silhouette against the lights of the house, and this guy is huge. And he comes up to me in the dark and he says, who's that? And I said, hey, I realize this is going to sound absolutely ridiculous at this time of night on a Sunday, but my name is Wendy Gooditis, and I'm running for office, and I wanted to talk to you about it. And he thought that was hysterical. And he said, you have some kind of guts to walk up this driveway in the dark. And we talked, and he was a dedicated Trumper. But at the end of that long conversation that was full of laughter, and we didn't agree on one single thing, but we laughed the whole way through. And at the end, he said, not only am I going to vote for you because you came up my driveway in the dark on a Sunday night walking, but I'm going to take you out to lunch after the election. So you never know. You never know. And the best, sometimes the best we can do in the rural areas is get a few more votes every election. And that's worth doing. It's worth the effort. And I so appreciate all of you who make that effort, all of you candidates who run in these difficult areas. I get it. And of course, our organizers of the Women's Summit and Lindsey for doing this forum. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think that story just exemplifies so much of what we're talking about tonight, right? The importance of organizing, the importance of messaging, the importance of trust and building partnerships and connecting with people. Vee, I would love to hear your thoughts. You are head of the Rural Caucus, and these challenges are not challenges that you haven't heard before and experienced before. Can you talk a little bit about additional ways maybe the party and participants that are joining us tonight can really work to support rural candidates and rural areas? Oh, you're on mute, Vee.
There we go. Sorry about that. So thank you so much. And I wanted to thank the organizers for inviting me and talk about a little bit. Someone mentioned Stacy Snyder. And Stacy is a perfect example of how we can help rural candidates and rural committees and rural voters. Stacy tracked me down several years ago, and the message I got was somebody from Nova wants to help you, and she knows. Long story short, Stacy has been the best partner and has helped candidates, has helped committees, has helped rural voters by this partnership. And really in Virginia, this is such a huge commonwealth, and we are so different. You know, the needs of rural voters on the Eastern Shore are not the same as rural voters in South Side. And they're really not the same as voters in far Southwest. We've got coal mining families that need to be spoken to by candidates. And so we have to talk to people in the language that they understand. And, you know, some of my fellow panelists were talking about gun issues. We have Democratic committee members who take their kids target practicing and who hunt. And you're right, when we have legislation that discounts them, they do feel cut off and they do feel their voices aren't heard. The other thing I have to mention is some people who live in rural areas have no broadband, none. And so when you're going to a certain locality, you have to do what you have to do. That may mean door knocking, that may things like campaign signs, which all the rural candidates will tell you are so important. Those might not be as important in Nova and in Richmond and in Hampton Roads, but for rural communities, when one neighbor sees another neighbor with a campaign sign, we have to do those things. And so we have to run in communities the way that is appropriate for that community, and it's not all the same. And what everyone has said about building the bench, absolutely, we have to do that. We've got to start with any office, volunteer at the library, and then perhaps you may get onto the library board, and from there, the school board. Every office is an opportunity to help your neighbors with policy. And those are really important. The other thing that no one's brought up, and I think that we should not take it for granted, is especially in Virginia, in our rural communities, we have a lot of veterans, a whole lot of veterans, and we need to reach out to them because a lot of times they feel ignored. And they are a great source, first of all, of potential candidates. Look at Elaine Luria. I mean, perfect example. Or Abigail Spanberger. We have veterans who are there. They and their families want to be heard, and their needs are a little bit different. So again, that's a potential base that we can help with. And the party obviously can help with. We do have a Veterans Caucus that does try to work together with us.
You hit on something that I am so passionate about, and that is connecting with veterans, especially in rural communities. That marries two of my passions there, because yep. I think for so many years, Republicans have monopolized the messaging on benefits and care for veterans. But when you actually look at the policy record, it's Democrats that are creating the policy that are actually keeping our nation's promise to those men and women who have served. And so I think that is a great way to continue to reach out in rural communities as well, because we are finding that so many veterans are now moving into rural communities. So that's a great idea. Sister Simone, thank you for joining us tonight. As we spoke earlier, you hosted an incredible summit right before all of the COVID-19 stuff hit downtown at the Press Club. And you have done some incredible work in rural communities all across the country. And I know many of the challenges we've talked about tonight have been Virginia focused. But my guess is, and I'd love for you to speak to this, that these are challenges that rural communities face across the country. Can you take us to a national level as we work to ensure that the Democrats can win in rural areas?
Oh, thank you so much, Lindsay. And to be together around this topic just makes my heart happy. It's hard not to be in physical proximity, but at least we can do this, and I'm very grateful. I think one of the pieces we did, just so everybody knows, last year we did 17 rural roundtables in 17 different little towns, villages across the country, 16 different states. And what we found, much as what the panel has been saying, the challenges of broadband, the challenges of education, the challenges of healthcare, which you all haven't talked as much about as what we've encountered around the country, the challenge of transportation. In rural communities, it takes so long to get any place. I'll never forget being in New Mexico. It's even tougher than Virginia. That to drive 3.5 hours is like, well, yeah, that's a short trip. In order to get to a grocery store or to get to some sort of doctor's appointment, the distance and the story of walking up the hill in the dark, I really appreciated that, Delegate, because knowing that you're in a different place, it is not the urban reality. And I think that one of the challenges is if we just show up at election time, it's not seen as authentic and it's not seen as relational. We were in one rural community in Missouri, and this woman said, well, you know, if you show up for a demonstration in the city, you're anonymous. There's no consequence. If we show up in my community, there's all kinds of consequences. So we're not conservative. We're just careful of our relationships. And it's being aware of the relationships and how do we create those. Rural communities are way more relational than the urban reality. The other piece is, in almost every rural roundtable we held, I would start off saying, you know, what do city folk like me get wrong about country living? And everybody kind of laugh, and then we get started. But at almost every one, at some point, people would say, city folk think country people are dumb and uneducated, and it's not true. And that sense of being disregarded, disrespected, until we break through that reality, we're in trouble. And I want to say that in most places that we went, yeah, there's the gun thing. Yeah, there's, you know, government, big government, little government, all these theoretical things. But when you begin talking to people about their needs and their experiences, how did they get to that place? What makes you worried about this? What do you think about our kids? How do you worry about our kids? Then you get to what really matters. And we need to be able to communicate that deeper reality and make sure that's what informs the election process, and then shake up the statewide Democratic Party to come and listen to these folks. Because the element of respect, basic respect that we have to have is at the heart of it. I want to say every place broadband is a critical issue. Broadband is huge, and paying for it is even more important. So making sure that the only places where we found that broadband worked well in local communities was where there were local cooperatives left over from the old electric cooperatives or the telephone cooperatives from the 30s and 40s. So we've got to find some new ways where community investment, community ownership, community management take effect. We also have to do something about access to food, because it's such a big issue for regular, affordable access, because grocery stores, they have to put up the prices in order to, because of transportation and everything else. We've got to find ways to make that work. Education. When we were out in Union Hill, Virginia, a woman told us that she'd applied to be a 5th grade teacher. She got hired to be a 5th grade teacher out, I think it's Buckingham County. And she was going to be a 5th grade teacher. She was so excited. She goes in for first day of orientation. There were no books for her 5th graders. There was no teacher's desk. And a bunch of the desks for the kids were broken. And what she had to do was to get volunteers or friends to come in and try to make a difference, to fix it up for her kids. So how are we respecting kids everywhere? And it's that quality of respect, of care, that I think if we bring a curiosity for people's experience, and we let go, city folk, let go of your judgment and encounter these fabulous people doing really important work. And that if we do that, then the relationships will be built and the elections will follow. But it's really more about the ongoing curiosity about how do we do this together. And we don't have to start with the hot button issues. I mean, you don't start with guns. You don't start with, I don't know what else is hot besides guns, but you start with, what do you care about? Talk to me. How'd you get there? Who are your kids? Who are you? And that's how we can build a state that works for the common good and build a nation that works for the common good. And we need you all involved with respect and engagement.
That was beautiful. Thank you. And you touched on so many important points. So one, the importance of building relationships without judgment. And I think that is effective in rural communities, but it's also effective in so many different areas of our life and what we're experiencing in our country right now. And if anything can come out of these hard times, the urge for people to reach out to those they may not traditionally reach out to, or develop relationships with people in different communities who have different backgrounds, that would be something good that could come out of this crazy time in our nation's history.
And I, as a person of faith, will say, let us pray to the Lord. That's true.
That's right. That's right. Well, Sister Simone, you brought up an incredible point too, that I just want to wrap up our session, because I know we have just a few minutes left. And I feel like this panel alone, we could spend 2 hours talking about all of the rich things that we've been able to talk about this evening and how important they all are. But you brought up an important point, Sister Simone, about the party. And we've been monitoring the chat box here too. And a lot of the questions are, what can the Democratic Party at the state level and also at the national level do to invest in our rural communities and invest in building the important infrastructure that could take us into the future? So I'd like to wrap up this session. Delegate Hurst, can you speak to that? But I'd like to hear from everybody on the panel quickly about their thoughts and ways in which the party can really invest in the future of Democrats in rural areas.
Yeah, thank you, Lindsay. I think the mechanism in how we do outreach can be varied, and it can adapt over time, and everybody can throw in their 2 cents on it for what could be. And I say we try it all. I think foundationally, though, what you need to get is a commitment out of people who are in power positions that they are going to make those investments in rural Virginia. And I would say that you sure as hell better think that we're on a better track, considering who's in leadership and what that should mean for the party moving forward. Some of you may know my campaign manager when I first ran for office in 2017, Andrew Whiteley, is now the executive director of the Democratic Party of Virginia. And he put on, the convention this last weekend, virtually. So if he doesn't care about rural Virginia, he's from Smith County, from Chilhowie, you know, if he doesn't care about it, considering he also managed my race and went to tech, then we have some serious problems. But I have had many commitments from him that we are going to have some new initiatives for rural Virginia moving forward from DPVA. And then for me, you all need to hold me accountable because I'm the campaign chair for the House Democratic Caucus for next cycle. And that means that we are going to try and recruit as many Democrats as possible and have a Democrat on the ballot in all 100 House of Delegates districts. But that doesn't just mean having people on the ballot too. I think in the future, we need to do a better job of coordinating with partner advocacy groups who really want to lean in and provide tools, resources, even just support. Having a buddy system is immensely powerful for some of these local races. And also wanting to make sure that while there has to be a serious conversation about whether or not a race in the year 2020 or 2021 is winnable. And that's okay. But as Jennifer said earlier, we need to be thinking about running this race, not just to win this year, but wanting to be able to eventually turn the tide and not have the kind of red-blue divide we have here in the Commonwealth. Because I guarantee you, and you all agree, that Democratic policies work better for rural families than Republican policies. And those rural voters damn well better have representation from Democrats because we care about them more. I truly believe that. But it's going to be an incredibly difficult fight. And it's something where we need to have accountability and responsibility from those in power, myself included now, to make sure that we make those investments in rural Virginia that might not have an immediate return, but will in the future.
Thank you. That is so important. Delegate Gooditis, can you speak to that point as well?
Well, so since 2017, in 2017, the caucus did a lot for a lot of races, and they did this much for my race, which is fine. Turns out I didn't need them, and I'm glad we won whatever. Well, we flipped 15 seats in 2017, huge progress. 2019, how many did we flip, Chris? Anyway, there was an even much. How many?
Last year, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
6.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we flipped, right. So we flipped 6 more. So there was a much bigger investment in many, many more seats. And so we're making progress, not only in terms, and I know that the caucus and represented by Delegate Hurst, the caucus is determined to have people run everywhere. And the caucus is doing better and better about supporting a wider range. Taking it back to my own race, nobody thought I could win that race in 2017. That was ridiculous. So I think that I'm going to take a little credit for some of the people who had been in the House for quite a while, in the General Assembly for a while. They saw if even Wendy Gooditis could win, then maybe we should be spreading it a little wider, spreading it out a little more. So who was it? It was Ian talking about Delegate David Reed and the support that he gives. And he's one of my very best buddies in the General Assembly. And he is so supportive and so there, and he's so on top of it, so organized. And he's got the thank you note written before you untie the ribbon on the president. Before he unties the ribbon on the president. He's just unbelievable that way. And I do think we need to be more like him and reach out. I get so swamped. My last campaign, everyone's, that was a really, really tough campaign because the guy I ran against the first time woke up, and he is a multi-millionaire. So I had a real fight, but I was so jealous of Delegate Reed for getting out of our area and driving down and knocking on doors with other candidates in other areas. And I hope the day comes when I, and certainly many others, feel that we can do that, to say, we know how it is and we're here to help. And I think that if we continue on this trend, more and more help will come every election. That's my hope.
That's great. Vee, can you talk a little bit about what the party can do to ensure that we can win in more rural areas?
Well, I think as Delegate Hurst said, having Andrew as executive director is going to be huge. He understands rural, and there's a whole lot of us who have known him who will be watching. The other thing I think that the party can do as far as legislation is to form some sort of advisory board that looks at legislation before the General Assembly actually sits in January and just says, you know, maybe if we change the wording a little bit, this would be a little bit easier in rural communities. And continue to do things like have people you know who are interested volunteer to be on some of the governor's boards. Have your voice heard. Have rural voices heard in any way possible. So whether it's in your local community, which obviously I think is the best, but also if you want to be heard in Richmond, reach out and be part of some of the governor's boards. That's definitely another issue. And if you can bring just 5 people together when we all can get back together again, or now do it virtually, and just talk, as Sister Simone said so wonderfully, in a low key, what are the things that are important to you? What is in your heart? We just have so much more in common than we do, you know, differently. There really are not that many issues. And even if we can't change things immediately, it's that long-term build the bench and invest in the future. You know, I think of Senator Boysko. She ran 3 times before she became a delegate. And so don't give up. This is a long-term investment. And I think that we will see the party now that, you know, there's a little bit of movement in rural areas and the interest is there. We have people who want to run in each of the localities. I think the party will come along. And of course, obviously support Rural Caucus.
Well, and it's incumbent upon all of us here tonight on the panel, but all the participants to ensure that we continue to raise the rural voices. And as Christian said earlier, and I know Ian and Jennifer and Lynlee and I've all discussed this before, but the figure that a cost per vote in a rural area is $8.37 compared to other areas where it's over, you know, $40 and in many cases in areas over $45, right? Investing in rural communities matters. It matters now, but it also matters in our future. Sister Simone, would you mind just closing us out on all of this and kind of bringing it all home? Because we've discussed so many important challenges tonight, and this is the start of a very, very important conversation that we've been having, but that we continue to need to have as we move forward, not just to the election in 2020, but beyond.
Well, I'm honored. I'm humbled because you all are doing the hard work of making this real. But I think the key for me, hearing what you have said, is that the sacred piece, for me it's sacred. Okay, I'm a Catholic sister, I'll talk a little faithy, but the sacred piece is coming with holy curiosity and not with immediate judgment. And it's with the holy curiosity that we can learn and care about each other in a way where we build and not tear down, where we come together to find solutions to shared problems. Because usually people, if it's a big problem in a community, people will say it's a big problem in the community, but our solutions will be different. And often what happens in partisan politics is we have our traditions that we've got to say and hold to the tradition to be a loyal Democrat or a loyal Republican. The problem is right now, COVID-19 has demonstrated that we're so far beyond the loyal traditional stereotypes. That we have got to work at relationship that builds beyond the stereotype that's there beyond the election. And for you all, this year is a perfect year for building the relationships that will make the difference, where we all say, we care about our community more than being divided. So let's find a way forward. And finding a way forward, I think, can then make it possible for a variety of victories without it getting so partisan and scorecard, and way more about helping our communities. So let's help our communities. Let's take care of each other. I did notice in the chat, somebody didn't think that rural folks would think that city folk think that they're dumb and uneducated. But I have to tell you, city folk, we've got work to do, because I came back after I heard that the first time, and I talked to my city folk friends, and they said, oh yeah, of course. Why else would they stay in a rural community? Yeah, they're dumb. And it was like, it was so shocking to me. So city folk, we've got work to do. We need to make the room for the rural communities to flourish and to hear their voice. So we need rural folks speaking up, and city folk, we've got some work to do. So let's do our part. And if we do it together in relationship, then we can build for the common good. That's easy. We can do it.
Amen. There's no other way to respond to that. That was a beautiful way of wrapping this session up. And again, I want to thank all of our participants tonight for spending your evening with us. Please continue to help us raise rural voices, because it's so important that we all do our part, whether you live in the city or in rural communities, to ensure that Democrats are not only competitive in every zip code in Virginia and throughout the country, but that we can win. And so I want to thank all of our panelists tonight for sharing your thoughts, your insights, and your experience with us. Gosh, I hope this is just the start to many, many conversations this group can have together. Catherine, please close us out.
Wow, that was fantastic. And it was so great hearing the panel. And thank you, audience, for being here. You're a wonderful audience. Your chat was on fire, as we say. And I know we have 19 questions. We're at 8:15. We're not going to be able to take those questions because, I mean, just hearing Sister wrap it up, I think I saw in the chat people said it was worth the whole presentation to hear your beautiful words, and they're so heartfelt. But I'm hoping I could take those 19 questions, because this is raising rural voices. And I want to make sure our audience feels heard. So Lindsey, would you be fine in the panel if we sent these questions off to you, and you guys can choose which ones you can answer, and we'll make sure that we get these answers back to people. And then maybe we can somehow, we do a summit recap. We may not get to this right away, but we'll make sure that we do answer these very, very good questions. So thank you again. And what I want to do is talk about tomorrow. And my job is to talk about tomorrow. We have a great panel with 7 senators, and it's called Cocktails and Conversations at 5 o'clock. And tomorrow is going to be the letter I, for inspiring and invigorating. And it certainly will be, because it'll be all about mansplaining tomorrow. How women run for office, get into office, and still have to deal with sexism and some other isms. So I hope you tune in. And we have lovely cocktails. Robin, if you want to, we've made special cocktails that we will be sharing via your summit email that you can get ready for tomorrow. Well, we have the Blue Lady, the Badass Get Things Done Margarita. We have Flip Virginia Blue Lady. We have Walk the Talk Cosmo, and I'm sure everybody's here favorite, Screw Orange One Driver. You know, we're badasses. Sometimes we get a little bit, you know, out of control, as we say. So tomorrow, join us, and thank you again. We're not done quite yet. We're going to do our wrap up, but I want to tell the panel it's really been great. This is the start of a long journey. We're going to continue our Network Nova power lunches out in the rural areas, and listen and learn and be humbled and help. And like Stacy Snyder is a great leader. So we're ready to stare. I know you're out there somewhere, my friend. Here she is. Yay!
So thank you all. Thank you, Catherine. I'd like to remind everyone that they will be getting an email. Links are in the email. Videos are in the email. And you can watch anything on networknova.org/watch. So please watch for that. And also please browse the Badass Boutique. That's networknova.org/shop. Consider getting a Virginia is my district mug or a When We Vote We Win t-shirt. Thank you to everyone, and stay safe, stay healthy, stay together. Winning is the only option. And I want to also thank the sponsors. Could we get the sponsor slide up, please? No? Okay. So no sponsor slide. Here we go. Okay. Maybe we'll back up and show the Badass Boutique slide too. There we go. Good. All right. Thank you. So there's that fabulous shirt, and we voted, we won, Flip Virginia Blue. Okay, and to thank you to our sponsors, particularly our top sponsors, Win Virginia, Family Friendly Economy, and VA Our Way. And of course, our partners, Vote Like a Girl, Rowan Tree, the Impact Center, SOAR, Bard's Alley, Headshots by Sam, Virginia's List, Resisterhood, and Forward. Thank you so much. Good evening.
Thank you. Bye, Sister Simone. Lynlee, we'll be talking. Bye, everybody. Bye, our wonderful audience. We'll